The autumn rain drummed against the windows of 42 Maple Street with the persistence of an old friend asking to come in. David Chen wiped his hands on a dish towel, glancing at the clock above the kitchen sink. 11:47 p.m. His wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma had been asleep for hours, but sleep had been elusive for him lately. The construction project at work had been demanding, and the stress of managing a team of 40 workers while dealing with budget cuts had left him restless most nights. He was reaching for his reading glasses when the knock came. Not the confident rap of a neighbor or the official pounding of authorities, but something hesitant, almost apologetic. 3 soft taps, a pause, then 3 more. David frowned, setting down his coffee mug. Who would be visiting at this hour? Through the peephole, he saw what appeared to be a family huddled under the small overhang of his front porch. A tall figure seemed to be shielding 2 smaller ones from the rain. They were bundled in what looked like makeshift clothing, and something about their posture suggested desperation rather than threat. David had always been the type of man who helped first and asked questions later. It was a trait that had gotten him into trouble at work more than once, particularly when he'd stood up for younger employees against unreasonable deadlines or defended workers who'd made honest mistakes. His supervisor, Marcus Webb, had warned him multiple times about being too soft for management. But David's father had taught him that strength wasn't about dominating others, it was about lifting them up when they fell. He unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The rain immediately began to patter on his bare feet, but that discomfort vanished the moment he got a clear look at his visitors. The family standing before him was unmistakably not human, yet their expressions of fear, hope, and exhaustion were universally recognizable. The adult figure stood perhaps 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and what appeared to be a carapace-like skin that shimmered with an oily iridescence in the porch light. 2 large, multifaceted eyes dominated a face that was both alien and, somehow, gentle. Behind this figure, 2 smaller beings, clearly offspring, pressed close together, their own eyes wide with what David could only interpret as terror. The tall being spoke, and, though the voice had an unusual harmonic quality, like multiple tones layering over each other, the words were clear English. Please, can you fix our door? David's mind raced through a dozen possible explanations, from elaborate pranks to hallucinations brought on by too much caffeine and stress. But the rain soaking through his shirt was real, the cold October air was real, and, most importantly, the fear in those alien eyes was undeniably real. Your door, he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The being gestured toward the street with one of its 4 arms. David noted this detail with the part of his mind that catalogued construction specifications. Our dwelling, the entrance mechanism has failed. We cannot get inside, and the little ones are. The voice trailed off, and David could hear something that sounded remarkably like a parent's worry. David looked past them to the street and saw what he had initially mistaken for a large van or RV. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be some kind of vehicle, but its surfaces seemed to flow and shift slightly, as if made of a material that was not quite solid. Faint lights pulsed along its edges in patterns that reminded him of a heartbeat. Dad? Emma's voice came from the stairs behind him. She had inherited his light sleeping patterns, unfortunately. Who's at the door? David turned to see his daughter halfway down the stairs, rubbing her eyes. Her favorite stuffed dinosaur, a well-worn brontosaurus named Mr. Stompy, hung from one hand. He felt a moment of protective panic. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that there are aliens at the front door? But Emma had already seen past him to their visitors. Instead of screaming or running, she tilted her head with the curious fearlessness that only children possess. Are those your kids? She asked the tall being directly. The alien's large eyes seemed to focus on Emma, and something that might have been relief passed across its features. Yes, small human. These are my offspring. They are frightened. Emma nodded sagely. Mr. Stompy gets scared of loud noises too. Is that why they're hiding? David watched in amazement as the 2 alien children slowly emerged from behind their parent. They were perhaps Emma's size, with the same iridescent carapace as their parent but, in softer, more muted tones. Their eyes, while large like their parents', had a different quality, more curious than fearful now that they were looking at Emma. The entrance to our shelter is malfunctioning,
the adult alien explained, now addressing both David and Emma.
We have been traveling for many cycles, and the little ones need rest and warmth. I detected your dwelling's energy signature suggests mechanical aptitude. David almost smiled despite the surreal situation. Apparently, his garage workshop full of tools and half-finished projects was visible even to alien technology.
David? What's going on?
Sarah's voice came from the top of the stairs. His wife appeared in her robe, took one look at the scene at their front door, and stopped mid-step.
To her credit, she didn't scream or faint.
Instead, she did what she always did in a crisis: she assessed the situation and moved toward action.
They need help with their door, Emma explained helpfully. And their kids are scared. Sarah looked from their daughter to the alien family to David.
He could see her mind working, weighing the impossibility of the situation against the evident need of the beings standing in their doorway. She had always been the practical one in their marriage, the one who made lists and planned ahead.
But she was also the woman who brought soup to sick neighbors and organized food drives at Emma's school.
Well, she said finally, I suppose we should get them out of the rain first. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of quiet activity that somehow felt both completely insane and perfectly natural.
Sarah immediately went into hostess mode, clearing space in their living room and turning up the thermostat.
The alien family introduced themselves with names that David's human tongue couldn't quite manage, so Emma dubbed them Mr. Shimmer, the adult, Glow, and Sparkle, the children. The aliens seemed amused rather than offended by this, and David noticed that they appeared to communicate with each other through subtle color changes in their carapaces as well as their harmonic voices. Emma, with the adaptability of childhood, had already begun showing Glow and Sparkle her collection of stuffed animals. The young aliens examined each toy with intense curiosity, their carapaces shifting through various colors, what David was beginning to recognize as expressions of wonder and delight. So, Sarah said, settling into her problem-solving mode as she handed Mr. Shimmer a towel, tell us about this door problem. Mr. Shimmer's explanation was complex, involving concepts of biomechanical interfaces and quantum-locked entry protocols that went far beyond David's construction background. But the basic problem was universal: they were locked out of their home, their children were tired and scared, and they needed someone with mechanical skills to help them get inside. I have tools, David found himself saying. And I fixed a lot of doors in my time.
Dad fixes everything, Emma added proudly.
He fixed my bike and the garage door and the washing machine that made the funny noise. Mr. Shimmer's eyes focused on David with what seemed like hope.
Your offspring speaks truly? You are a fixer of things?
David thought about all the times he'd been called in to solve problems at work sites, all the mechanisms he'd jury-rigged back to life, all the impossible deadlines he'd met through sheer determination and creative problem-solving. He thought about Marcus Webb's constant criticism, the implication that his compassion made him weak, that his willingness to help others was somehow a character flaw. I fix things, he said simply.
That's what I do.
Part 2, the fixing the walk to the alien vessel dwelling, Mr. Shimmer called it, was an exercise in controlled amazement. David carried his toolbox, its familiar weight grounding him in reality even as everything else about the situation defied belief. Emma insisted on coming along despite the late hour and the rain, and neither David nor Sarah had the heart to deny her this adventure. Sarah walked beside them, her practical mind already asking questions about the vessel's construction and power source. The dwelling was larger up close than it had appeared from their porch, roughly the size of a large RV but with surfaces that seemed to breathe slightly, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that suggested life rather than mere machinery. The door was barely visible, a section of the wall that was slightly different in texture, with what appeared to be a palm-sized indentation surrounded by intricate patterns that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The recognition matrix has failed, Mr. Shimmer explained, placing one of his 4 hands against the indentation.
The patterns flickered briefly but remained dim. It no longer acknowledges my biological signature.
David studied the mechanism with the eye of someone who had spent 20 years troubleshooting everything from elevator controls to garage door openers. While the technology was clearly beyond his understanding, he could recognize certain universal principles. There was a sensor component, a processing unit of some kind, and what appeared to be a mechanical locking system behind the bioluminescent display. "Have you tried percussive maintenance?" he asked, pulling his rubber mallet from the toolbox.
Mr. Shimmer's harmonic voice rose in pitch. "Percussive maintenance?"
"Sometimes when electronics get stuck, you just need to give them a little tap to reset the connection."
David gestured toward the mechanism. "May I?"
The alien stepped aside, and David gently tapped the area around the sensor with the rubber head of his mallet. The patterns flickered more brightly for a moment, then dimmed again. Might be a loose connection or a power fluctuation. David knelt down and opened his toolbox fully.
"Emma, can you hold the flashlight?"
His daughter immediately came forward, playing the familiar role of assistant that she'd learned during countless weekend projects. The beam illuminated the area around the door mechanism, and David could see what appeared to be seams in the otherwise smooth surface access panels, perhaps.
"Mr. Shimmer, do these sections open? I might be able to get at the actual connections."
The alien gestured with one of his hands, and a section of the wall near the door became translucent, revealing a complex network of what looked like biological circuits, part technology, part living tissue. David had seen similar hybrid systems in some of the advanced building automation systems he'd worked with, though nothing quite like this. "This is fascinating," Sarah said, leaning in for a closer look. As a nurse, she was comfortable with biological systems, and her scientific curiosity was clearly overriding any remaining shock at the situation.
"Is this some kind of biomechanical interface?"
"Your species would call it a living circuit," Mr. Shimmer confirmed. "It grows with the dwelling, learns our patterns, adapts to our needs."
"But, sometimes."
The patterns in his carapace shifted to darker hues.
"Sometimes it becomes confused." David studied the visible circuitry, noting areas where the bioluminescence was dim or flickering.
It reminded him of troubleshooting the electrical system in their house, looking for blown fuses or loose connections. The principles seemed similar, even if the technology was incomprehensible. There, he pointed to a section where the living circuits seemed to cluster around a node that was barely glowing.
"That looks like it might be your problem. Some kind of power distribution point?"
"The central processing nexus," Mr. Shimmer confirmed. "But, how did you 20 years of fixing things teaches you to recognize patterns?" David said, reaching into his toolbox.
"The question is, how do I get to it?"
What followed was an hour of careful work that would have been impossible without Mr. Shimmer's guidance and trust. The alien had to override safety protocols to allow David access to the dwelling's internal systems, essentially giving a complete stranger permission to perform surgery on their home. The alien children, Glow and Sparkle, watched nervously from a safe distance where Emma had established a small fort using her jacket and Sarah's umbrella. The actual repair turned out to be both incredibly complex and remarkably simple.
The central processing nexus was indeed suffering from what David would have called a loose connection in any human-built system.
But, instead of copper wires and plastic insulators, he was working with what appeared to be nerve-like fibers and crystalline junction points that pulsed with their own internal light. Using a combination of his smallest screwdriver, a pair of electronic tweezers, and an almost mystical intuition about how systems should work, David managed to realign the connections. The key insight came when he realized that the biomechanical system wasn't just electrical, it was responding to pressure and chemical signals as well. By carefully adjusting the physical positioning of the nexus components, he could restore the proper flow of both energy and information. "Try it now," he said, stepping back and wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool October air. Mr. Shimmer approached the door mechanism and placed his hand against the sensor panel. The patterns blazed to life, cycling through a beautiful sequence of colors before settling into a steady, warm glow. There was a soft sound like a sigh of relief, and the door section of the wall simply opened, flowing aside like water to reveal the interior of the dwelling. The inside was warmly lit and clearly designed for the comfort of beings much larger than humans. The space seemed bigger than the exterior suggested, with organic curves and surfaces that pulsed gently with the same living light as the door mechanism. It was alien, certainly, but it was unmistakably a home, a place meant for safety, rest, and family. "You did it, Dad." Emma cheered, and Glow and Sparkle immediately joined in with harmonious sounds that could only be expressions of joy. But it was Mr. Shimmer's reaction that affected David most deeply. The tall alien stood for a moment looking at the open doorway, and the patterns in his carapace cycled through what David was beginning to understand were emotions: relief, gratitude, something that might have been joy. When he turned back to David, his large eyes seemed to shimmer with an expression that transcended species barriers. "You have given my family safety," the alien said simply.
"How do we thank one who restores home?"
David looked at the open dwelling, at the alien children already moving toward warmth and security, at his own family standing beside him in the rain. He thought about all the times at work when he'd been told that caring about others was a weakness, that stopping to help someone else delayed the project, that showing compassion was unprofessional. "You don't need to thank me," he said.
"This is just what you do." Part 3, the understanding. The next morning arrived with the startling normalcy that follows extraordinary events.
David woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Emma chattering about her new friends from space as Sarah made pancakes. For a moment, lying in bed with sunlight streaming through familiar windows, he wondered if the entire experience had been an elaborate dream brought on by work stress and too much late-night coffee. Then, he looked out the window and saw the alien dwelling still parked in front of the Andersons' house across the street. The Andersons were out of town visiting their daughter in Seattle, so their driveway was empty, a fortunate coincidence that had prevented additional complications. By the time David made it downstairs, Emma was already asking if they could invite their new friends for breakfast. Sarah had the look she got when she was processing something complex, the same expression she wore when dealing with difficult medical cases at the hospital. "So that really happened," David said, pouring coffee and noting that his hands were steady despite the surreal circumstances.
"It really happened," Sarah confirmed. "The question is, what do we do now?"
Before David could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Not the desperate tapping of the night before, but a gentle, respectful sound. Emma immediately ran to answer it, with David close behind. Mr. Shimmer stood on their porch, but he looked different in the morning light. His carapace had taken on warmer tones, and his posture seemed more relaxed. Behind him, Glow and Sparkle waited politely, their young faces bright with curiosity. "Good morning, David. Who fixes?" Mr. Shimmer said, his harmonic voice carrying what sounded like warmth. "We come to express gratitude and to understand."
"Understand what?" David asked, stepping aside to invite them in.
"Your actions last night were unexpected." Mr. Shimmer entered the house with careful movements, clearly mindful of his size relative to human furniture. "In our travels, we have encountered many species, many individuals. Most respond to our presence with fear, aggression, or demands for compensation. You simply helped." Emma immediately began showing Glow and Sparkle her collection of books, and David was amazed to see that the young alien seemed genuinely interested in the pictures and stories. They communicated with Emma through a combination of their harmonic sounds and what appeared to be color-patterned displays on their carapaces.
"You want something to drink?" Sarah asked, already moving into hostess mode again. "I'm not sure what." "I mean, do you drink coffee?"
"We do not require your nutritional substances," Mr. Shimmer replied courteously. "But we observe that the ritual of shared consumption is important to human social bonding. We would be honored to participate, if possible." What followed was perhaps the most surreal breakfast of David's life. Sarah managed to find some herbal tea that Mr. Shimmer could at least hold and appreciate the aroma of, while the children, human and alien alike, seemed to communicate primarily through shared laughter and picture books. "So where are you traveling to?" David asked, settling into the strange comfort of having conversation with a 7-foot-tall being from another world. "We are refugees," Mr. Shimmer said, his carapace shifting to more somber tones. "Our world experienced what you might call environmental collapse. Not from war or violence, but from our own failure to maintain the balance of our ecosystem. We are among the few who escaped." Sarah's hand went to her heart. As someone who worked in healthcare, she understood the weight of loss and displacement. "I'm so sorry. How many of you made it out?" "Perhaps 1 in 10,000, Mr. Shimmer replied quietly. "We search now for a place where we might begin again." A world with the right atmospheric composition, the proper gravitational parameters.
But, more than that.
He paused, watching Emma teaching Sparkle how to make paper airplanes.
We search for a place where different species might coexist peacefully.
David felt something twist in his chest. Here was a being who had lost his entire world, who was traveling through space with his children looking for nothing more than a chance to start over, and David's own species' track record with accepting differences wasn't exactly encouraging.
Earth isn't exactly known for its tolerance, he said honestly.
We have trouble getting along with members of our own species, let alone.
Yes, Mr. Shimmer agreed.
We have observed this. It is why we remain hidden, why we travel mostly at night, why we were so surprised by your reaction.
Most humans we have encountered respond to difference with suspicion.
David thought about his workplace, about Marcus Webb's constant pressure to be tougher with his crew, about the way management treated workers as expendable resources rather than human beings with families and feelings. He thought about the news, full of stories about people turning against each other over the smallest differences in opinion or appearance. But, not all humans, Emma said confidently, looking up from her paper airplane demonstration.
Dad helps everyone.
He helped Mrs. Peterson when her pipes froze, and he helped Mr. Garcia fix his car, and he always brings groceries to the old lady at the end of the street.
Mr. Shimmer's large eyes focused on David with renewed interest. This is consistent behavior? This helping?
David felt uncomfortable with the attention.
It's not. I mean, anyone would.
No, Mr. Shimmer said firmly.
Not anyone would.
In our observations of your species, we have found that most individuals prioritize their own immediate needs above the welfare of others.
You chose differently.
Sarah reached over and squeezed David's hand.
He's always been like that.
Sometimes I think it's going to get him in trouble at work, the way he stands up for people. It has gotten me in trouble at work, David admitted. My supervisor thinks I'm too soft, too willing to help instead of just getting things done. Mr. Shimmer's carapace shifted through several color patterns before settling on what David had learned to recognize as deep thought. In our culture, we have a concept that might translate as the strength of foundation. It means that true power comes not from dominating others, but from building systems that support everyone. Leaders who understand this create societies that endure.
Those who do not.
The alien's voice carried unmistakable sadness. Those who do not create civilizations that eventually consume themselves. David felt a chill of recognition. He had seen this dynamic at work, in politics, in communities where people fought for temporary advantage while ignoring the long-term consequences of their actions.
Is that what happened to your world? He asked gently. In part.
Our leaders became focused on individual power rather than collective survival. When the crisis came, they were unable to respond because they had weakened the very systems that might have saved us. Mr. Shimmer watched Glow and Sparkle working together with Emma to build increasingly elaborate paper airplanes. But we learned something valuable from our failure. We learned that the individuals who survive catastrophe are not the strongest in the traditional sense, they are those who know how to build bridges instead of walls. The room fell quiet except for the children's laughter. David found himself thinking about his own life choices, about the times he'd been criticized for helping a struggling employee instead of firing them, for taking time to explain a complex procedure instead of just giving orders, for treating his construction crew as collaborators rather than subordinates. Marcus Webb had called it weakness. But, sitting here with a being whose entire civilization had collapsed, David was beginning to understand that maybe strength and weakness were more complicated than he thought.
We must leave soon, Mr. Shimmer said eventually.
We have stayed too long in one place already. But, before we go, we wanted to offer you something. The alien reached into what appeared to be a storage compartment in his carapace. David was still getting used to the biology of his new friends, and withdrew a small, crystalline device that pulsed with gentle light. This is a communication beacon, Mr. Shimmer explained. If you ever need help, if you ever find yourself in a situation where your kindness has created enemies, activate this and we will come. David stared at the device.
You'd do that? For someone you just met?
You gave us our home back, Mr.
Shimmer said simply.
More than that, you showed us that not all members of your species respond to difference with fear.
That knowledge gives us hope for finding a place to belong. Emma looked up from her paper airplane construction project. Will we see you again?
Sparkle, who had been mostly quiet during the visit, suddenly spoke up in her harmonic voice, "We are friends now."
Friends find each other again. Blow nodded enthusiastically, his carapace shifting through bright, happy colors. Distance is just space. Friendship is forever. After the aliens left, the house felt strangely quiet.
Emma spent the morning drawing pictures of her new friends, while Sarah called in sick to work, claiming she needed a mental health day, which was technically true if not complete. David found himself standing in his garage, looking at the tools that had somehow enabled him to repair technology beyond his understanding. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The display showed his supervisor's number.
"Chen, where the hell are you?"
Marcus Webb's voice was sharp with irritation. "The Riverside project is behind schedule, and your crew is asking questions about the safety protocols again. We need you to shut that down and get them focused on speed instead of paranoia." David looked out through the garage door toward the spot where the alien dwelling had been parked. He thought about Mr. Shimmer's words about civilizations that consumed themselves, about leaders who prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability. "The safety protocols are there for a reason, Marcus," he said calmly. "If the crew has concerns, we should address them, not ignore them."
"Christ, Chen, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're too soft for this job.
These guys are paid to work, not to think. Your job is to make sure they do what they're told, not to coddle them." For the first time in his career, David felt a clarity that surprised him.
"No, Marcus.
My job is to build things that last and to make sure my crew goes home safe to their families every night. If that's too soft for you, then maybe we need to talk to HR about what kind of leadership this company really wants."
There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just done pretending that treating people like human beings is a character flaw." David kept his voice level, professional.
"The Riverside project will be completed safely and on time. But it will be done right, with proper safety protocols and respect for the crew.
If you have a problem with that, we can discuss it with management." Marcus's voice rose. "You know what your problem is, Chen? You think being nice makes you strong.
But, in the real world, nice guys finish last.
Soft leadership gets people hurt and projects delayed.
You need to learn to destroy that weak part of yourself if you want to survive in this business."
David thought about Mr. Shimmer's civilization, destroyed by leaders who had confused dominance with strength. He thought about his alien friends searching the galaxy for a place where different species could coexist peacefully. He thought about Emma's easy acceptance of beings who were literally from another world.
"You're wrong, Marcus," he said quietly. "The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, because he becomes something that can't be broken, someone who builds instead of tears down, someone who lifts others up instead of pushing them down."
That's not weakness. That's the only kind of strength that actually matters.
He hung up the phone before Marcus could respond.
That evening, as David was helping Emma with her homework and Sarah was preparing dinner, the local news reported on a strange atmospheric anomaly that had been detected over their county the night before.
The meteorologist called it an unexplained electromagnetic signature that had appeared briefly around midnight before moving on toward the northwest. "Weird weather patterns lately," Sarah commented, not looking up from her cooking. "Very weird," David agreed, catching Emma's eye. His daughter grinned and went back to her math problems, which now included several drawings of friendly aliens helping solve addition problems. Over the following weeks, David's approach to work began to change in subtle but significant ways. He found himself standing up to unreasonable demands more consistently, not with aggression or confrontation, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to distinguish between true strength and its counterfeits. When Marcus Webb tried to pressure him into cutting safety corners, David calmly documented the conversation and forwarded copies to both HR and upper management. When a younger supervisor started bullying one of the newer workers, David intervened with the kind of gentle but firm guidance he might have shown his own daughter.
The results surprised everyone, including David himself.
Rather than creating conflict, his steady insistence on doing things right began to create a pocket of calm competence within the company. His crew's productivity actually increased when they weren't worried about being berated for asking safety questions. The quality of their work improved when they felt supported rather than threatened. Other supervisors began asking David how he managed to get such consistent performance from his team. Marcus Webb, perhaps sensing that his approach was becoming increasingly isolated, began to leave David alone. The Riverside project was completed not only on time but under budget, with 0 safety incidents and a quality rating that earned the company a bonus from the client. "I don't understand how you did it," the project manager admitted during the wrap-up meeting. "Webb's been telling everyone that your team would be a disaster because you're too soft on them." David thought about a 7-foot-tall alien who had entrusted a complete stranger with the safety of his family. "Sometimes what looks like softness is actually the hardest thing you can do," he said. "It takes more strength to build trust than to demand obedience." The communication beacon that Mr. Shimmer had given him sat on David's workbench in the garage, its crystal surface dark and quiet. He had never needed to activate it, but its presence reminded him daily of the larger universe beyond his small corner of Earth. Sometimes, when Emma was drawing pictures of her alien friends or when Sarah talked about the fascinating biological adaptations they had observed, David wondered if they would ever see their unusual visitors again. The answer came 6 months later, on another rainy night in April. This time, the knock on the door was confident and joyful, the sound of friends returning home. David opened the door to find not just Mr. Shimmer and his children, but 2 other adult aliens as well. All of them looked healthier, happier, more settled than they had during that desperate October night. "David, who fixes?" Sparkle's voice had gained complexity as she grew, her harmonic tones now capable of expressing sophisticated emotions. "We have returned." Emma, now 9 and even more fearlessly curious than before, immediately launched into questions about their travels while Sarah began making tea. The new aliens were introduced as other family members who had been reunited during their journey, an aunt and uncle who had been searching for Mr. Shimmer's family since the evacuation of their home world. "We bring news," Mr. Shimmer announced once everyone was settled in the living room. "We have found it. A world where we can begin again." David felt a mixture of joy and sadness. "That's wonderful. But it means you'll be leaving for good." "Yes," Mr. Shimmer confirmed. "But before we go, we wanted to share something with you. Our new world is not empty, it is home to several other species who have also lost their original homes. We are building something unprecedented, a truly multi-species civilization based on cooperation rather than dominance." The alien's carapace shifted through patterns of excitement and anticipation. "We are using your principles, David, who fixes. When conflicts arise, we ask, what would build trust rather than demanding obedience? When resources are scarce, we ask, how do we strengthen the foundation rather than fighting over scraps? When individuals seek power, we ask, will this choice help everyone thrive, or only the few?" Sarah leaned forward, her medical training making her intensely curious about the practical applications. "How do you make decisions when different species have different needs?" "We have learned," said the ant Glow had designated her as Harmony, "that true strength comes not from eliminating differences, but from creating systems that honor them. A being who destroys the parts of himself that seem weak often destroys the very qualities that make cooperation possible: empathy, patience, the willingness to listen." The uncle, whom Emma had dubbed Melody, added, "We have found that the individuals who survive the collapse of their worlds are those who understand that their own strength is meaningless without the strength of their community." David thought about his own transformation over the past months, how learning to stand firm in his values had paradoxically made him more flexible in his methods. He had discovered that refusing to compromise his principles had actually given him more options, not fewer. By insisting on treating his crew with respect, he had unlocked levels of creativity and commitment that fear-based management could never achieve. "We want to offer you a choice," Mr. Shimmer said quietly. "Our new world has need for builders, for those who can create systems that serve everyone rather than the few. There is a place for you there, if you wish it." The room fell silent. David looked at Sarah, at Emma, at these beings who had somehow become family in the space of a single desperate night and a few subsequent visits. The offer was impossible, impractical, and utterly tempting. "It's not that simple," Sarah said gently. "We have our own lives here, our own responsibilities." Of course, Mr. Shimmer agreed. "But the offer will remain open. And, in the meantime," he produced another crystalline device, larger and more complex than the communication beacon. "This is a learning interface. It will allow you to study our experiences, to understand how we are building this new civilization. Perhaps some of our discoveries will be useful to you here." Emma, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Will other people be able to meet you? I mean, not everyone is ready, but some people might be." Sparkle and Glow exchanged rapid color pattern communications with their parent. Mr. Shimmer's carapace shifted through several thoughtful hues before settling on what David had learned was his decision-making pattern. "Perhaps," the alien said slowly. "We have learned much about your species during our travels. There are others like you, individuals who respond to difference with curiosity rather than fear. As our new civilization grows stronger, as we perfect these principles of cooperative strength, perhaps we can begin to make more open contact." "A cultural exchange program," Sarah mused. "Imagine what we could learn from each other." David found himself thinking about the broader implications. If there were others like Mr. Shimmer's family, other refugee species looking for homes, other civilizations struggling with the balance between individual power and collective survival, then the principles they were developing could have applications far beyond one alien family or one human construction supervisor. The evening passed quickly, filled with stories of their travels, descriptions of their new world, and detailed discussions of the governance structures they were developing. When it came time for goodbyes, Emma surprised everyone by presenting each alien child with a carefully crafted friendship bracelet. "So you don't forget us," she explained seriously. Sparkle and Glow immediately began examining the bracelets with the intense fascination they brought to all human artifacts. "We will treasure these," Sparkle said solemnly. "And we will remember the human child who taught us that friendship has no boundaries." Mr. Shimmer approached David one final time. "You changed our understanding of your species," he said. "But, more than that, you showed us what it means to build strength through service to others. In our new world, there are monuments to great leaders, great inventors, great warriors. But we are planning something unprecedented, a monument to those who help strangers fix their doors." David felt tears prick at his eyes. "You don't need to." "Yes, we do," Mr. Shimmer interrupted gently. "Because the lesson you taught us is the foundation of everything we hope to build. The man who destroys his weak self, his fears, his selfishness, his need to dominate others, that man can never be destroyed by others because he has become something imperishable. He has become a force that builds rather than tears down." As David watched the alien dwelling disappear into the night sky, its bioluminescent patterns fading into the stars, he realized that he would probably never know whether he had made the right choice. Maybe he should have been harder on his crew, more focused on immediate results, more willing to prioritize efficiency over compassion. Maybe Marcus Webb was right that the real world demanded a different kind of strength. But, standing there in his driveway with his wife and daughter beside him, looking up at stars that he now knew contained beings capable of both great destruction and great cooperation, David felt something that he had never experienced before: complete certainty that he was exactly who he was supposed to be. The learning interface that Mr. Shimmer had left became a family project over the following months. Its holographic displays showed them images and data from the developing multi-species civilization, and David was amazed to see how the principles he had stumbled toward through intuition were being systematically applied on a planetary scale. Conflict resolution systems based on mutual benefit rather than domination. Economic structures that measured success by the well-being of the least advantaged members of society. Leadership models that prioritized the development of others over personal advancement. Sarah began incorporating some of these concepts into her work at the hospital, finding ways to improve patient care by strengthening the support systems for the medical staff. Emma started a club at school for kids from different backgrounds to share their cultures and learn from each other. David continued to refine his management approach, discovering that each challenge became easier as his reputation for fairness and competence grew. The communication beacon remained silent, but David found that he no longer felt the need to activate it. Whatever challenges arose in his daily life, he was discovering resources within himself that he had never known existed. The strength that came from refusing to compromise his values was different from what he had expected, not the brittle hardness of domination, but the flexible durability of a foundation designed to support others. Years later, when Emma was in high school and had become interested in studying xenobiology, a field that didn't quite exist yet but that she was confident would be needed someday, she asked her father what he thought had been the most important moment of that first night when the aliens had knocked on their door. David thought about it carefully, remembering the rain, the fear in those alien eyes, the impossible choice between safety and compassion. "I think it was when I decided to open the door," he said finally. "Not because I knew what would happen, but because closing it was never really an option." "Why not?" Emma asked. "You didn't know them. You didn't know if they were dangerous." David smiled, thinking about a 7-foot-tall being who had entrusted his children's safety to a human stranger, and about the civilization they were building based on the principle that true strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. "Because the moment you start deciding who deserves help based on whether they look like you or think like you or come from the same place you do, you've already lost something important," he said. "You've destroyed the part of yourself that makes you human in the first place." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "So being strong means being someone who doesn't need to make others weak?" "Something like that," David agreed. "The man who destroys his weak self, his fears, his prejudices, his need to be superior to others, that man can never be destroyed by others because he's become something that can't be broken. He's become someone who builds bridges instead of walls." That night, as David was closing up the garage after working on a neighbor's broken lawnmower, he noticed that the communication beacon was glowing softly. Not with the urgent light that would signal distress, but with the gentle pulse that indicated a simple message. The holographic display showed a brief scene from Mr. Shimmer's new world, a bustling city where beings of half a dozen different species worked together on construction projects that seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself. At the center of a plaza stood a simple monument, a door, standing open, with words inscribed in multiple languages beneath it. David couldn't read most of the alien scripts, but he recognized the English translation, in honor of those who choose to help strangers fix their doors. He stood there for a long time, looking at that impossible monument on an impossible world, thinking about the simple choice he had made on a rainy October night that had somehow rippled outward into the stars. Tomorrow he would go back to work, would continue trying to build things that lasted and to treat people with the dignity they deserved. He would continue to discover that true strength was not the ability to dominate others, but the courage to remain compassionate in a world that often mistook kindness for weakness. The beacon's glow faded, but David found that he was smiling as he turned off the garage lights and headed back to the house where his family waited. Somewhere among the stars, beings from across the galaxy were learning to live together in peace, guided by principles that had begun with something as simple as a father's decision to help a frightened family get home. It wasn't much, perhaps, in the grand scope of the universe. But it was enough. It was a beginning. And, sometimes, David reflected as he looked up at the stars one more time, that's all anyone can do: choose to be the kind of person who opens doors instead of closing them, who builds instead of destroys, who understands that the only strength worth having is the kind that makes others stronger too. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, because he becomes something that cannot be broken, a force for good in a universe that desperately needs more of them.